So, we're continuing to talk about the fruits of the Spirit, and this week we're on to kindness. Now, this is a slightly different talk to the one that I originally wrote, because the one I originally wrote was about turning the other cheek and how that's a deeply ancient Jewish virtue. And I still believe that to be true, but right now it's a little bit on the nose, so we're going to approach this from a slightly different angle. I think that fruits of the Spirit come from time spent with God, time spent close with God. They're really good things that we can do, attributes of God's character even, that it's possible to live in our daily life when you know with confidence that you are loved by God and worthy of love and surrounded by love. That kind of safety makes it possible to live out these fruits of the Spirit. And I think kindness can mean so many things in so many ways. But when we look at the thread of loving kindness, which we see both in the Old Testament and in the New, kindness isn't just smiling at people. Smiling at people is great. It makes the world a better place. But kindness is something a bit deeper than that. It's more complicated. I think for me, kindness is always remembering that there is another human being made in God's image that you are responding to, even when they're horrible to you. It's not taking everything you can take so that there is enough for that other human being who's made in God's image, even if you're entitled to take everything. It's not taking everything that somebody owes you if it leaves them cold at night. It's trusting that you don't need to hurt or exploit people to save up lots for the future, because God will walk with you and God will walk with them. So I'd say kindness, which in the Hebrew is chesed. Chesed kindness, spirit kindness, is that kind of lingering breath that's possible because God lingers in the world. And this is something that we see a lot in the laws in Judaism. It's this kind of kindness of seeing the humanity in other people, even if they don't come from the same country as you, even if they don't come from your family, even if they're slaves. And this is in the whole of the Old Testament. Judaism is a very kind religion. We see it in Leviticus, we see it in Deuteronomy. And I know I've talked about this to death in the past, but there are two examples that keep coming to mind for me. So the first one is in Leviticus. And these are one of the rules that God gives us to encourage us to be generous to each other. For example, this is the rule of gleaning. So in a society where everything you ate and everything you had comes from the field, it's a rule that you can't have the whole field. There's a little bit at the edge that is for widows and orphans and for birds of the air. Farmers have to leave that bit around the edge and the grain that falls that you naturally drop during the harvest so that the poor can gather it up. People take less than they can. They don't earn everything they can so that other people can have enough to eat. Because in the long term, that's the only way where people in desperate times will have enough, if the rich don't take everything they're entitled to. And I think this is chesed, loving kindness, which is ensuring that other people don't go hungry. The other really important example, and I know I keep coming back to this, is in Deuteronomy, which is that if someone borrows your ox cart, which is not something that happens very much in the 21st century, but we can think of examples, and they leave their coat in it. But you're using the ox cart till tomorrow, so you still need the ox cart, and you've got the coat in it. You still have to make sure that you give them their coat back, which means you have to chase them around and find them and give them their coat back, even if they haven't finished with their ox cart. Why? Because at night it gets cold, and that man might need his coat to be warm. And the rule is extra binding. It says it's extra binding if the person is poor, because in all likelihood they wouldn't have any other coat to keep warm with. And that's kind of graciousness, courtesy, compassion. That's what kindness means throughout this whole thing. So I think the question for kindness is, when can we not take what we're owed? That's, a spiteful word back at someone who's spiteful for us, or money that we're entitled to. When do we not need to take everything that we're owed? When can we share it? When can we leave enough for others? And there are lots of different ways of thinking about times when you could share, but I guess one of the ones that's kind of poignant around here is giving to the food bank. I think most people, and not everybody, and that isn't everybody, because some people need to take from the food bank. We all have those times in our lives, and it's important that we acknowledge that because it makes it okay for other people to do it. But giving to the food bank is a bit like gleaning. It's a good way of leaving something for other people. Like leaving the bit of corn around the edge of the field, the food banks at the moment are one of the very few places where hungry people can be fed. Now, obviously, food banks are a stopgap solution and they're not ideal in themselves, and we need to make a world where people aren't dependent on food banks and campaign for a government that does more to prevent people from going hungry. But food banks at the moment are an option, the only option for some people, and it's important to be generous in that way. I'd also say, not quite turning the other cheek, but not being unkind to people who are unkind to us first is also loving kindness. Not just because it stops nastiness escalating, but it gives people a chance to not keep being horrible. Because if they're horrible to you and then you're not horrible back, and you don't respond with meanness or cruelty, sometimes they've just got a little bit of space and then they can turn into the nice person that God made them to be. And there is that nice, kind person that God made all of us to be. And I believe that person is all within all of us. Sometimes, of course, responding to someone who's angry with you with kindness actually makes them even madder. But that can feel very satisfying. So if that happens and they get mad because you're kind and you don't stoop to their level, take that satisfaction and run with it. It's one of the gifts of God, I believe. But I think consistently refusing to rise to people who get angry is one of the best ways that we can transform our society. But this is a proper fruit of the Spirit, though. So it's one of those things that's only really possible when we gather together as a church, when we walk with God, when we have that security that God is walking with us. Amen.